Narrator, imagine this. You walk into a place you once called home. You're wearing the same uniform that cost you blood, sweat, and tears. A uniform made not just of cloth, but of sacrifice, loyalty, and brotherhood. But instead of a handshake, you're greeted with laughter. Instead of gratitude, you're greeted with ridicule. They don't see the battles you fought. They don't hear the cries of the brothers you brought with you. All they see is an old man in a faded uniform. Narrator, but what if I told you that in just 2 hours this little town would be awakened? That brotherhood would roar louder than any laughter, that the spirit of sacrifice would silence even the cruelest whisper? Narrator, stay with me, because what happened next is not just a story about an old veteran. It's about honor. It's about sacrifice. It's about a brotherhood that never forgets its comrades, and about a moment that changed a town forever. Part 1. A quiet morning. A hero dresses again. It was a morning much like any other, but for Marcus Harris, today carried a weight that few could ever understand. In a small house at the edge of a sleepy town, where the grass had grown tall and the paint on the fence peeled away like old memories, Marcus slowly opened his eyes. There was no rush. At 76, every movement required thought, patience, and a little courage. He lay still for a moment, listening to the gentle rhythm of the rain outside, a sound that carried him back decades to mornings spent waking up in muddy SEAL training camps, drenched, exhausted, but brimming with fire. Marcus reached for the battered wristwatch on his nightstand. 6 a.m., right on time. He sat up, feeling the familiar stiffness in his knees and back the aches that had become old friends over the years. Marcus smiled faintly. Pain, he thought, was a small price for a life well lived and well fought. On a wooden chair beside his bed, neatly folded and waiting, was his old Navy SEAL uniform. It was worn thin, its color faded by years and by memories. But for Marcus, it was more than fabric. It was a testament, a story sewn into every thread. He reached out and picked up the jacket carefully, his fingers brushing over the weathered patches as if tracing a sacred script. The SEAL insignia, a proud eagle grasping a trident, and a rifle was still visible, though dulled by time. Marcus let out a slow breath. Today he would wear it, not for applause, not for recognition, but for remembrance. Remembrance of the brothers who stood beside him in hellish places far from home, of promises whispered in foxholes under blackened skies, of a vow never to forget, never to leave a brother behind. Scene shift. Marcus standing in front of an old mirror, the morning light pale and soft. He dressed methodically. First the sturdy khaki trousers, then the jacket, each movement deliberate, almost ceremonial. As he buttoned the jacket, his hand paused over the SEAL emblem. He closed his eyes, and the faces returned their young faces, full of life, humor, and reckless hope. He saw Jimmy, always the loudest in the room, but the first to leap into danger. Mike, who dreamed of opening a repair shop once his service ended. Carlos, who used to talk about taking everyone home to meet his family in Texas. Marcus's chest tightened. They were gone now, but they lived on, stitched into the very fabric he wore. The rain outside grew steadier, a soft, steady percussion. He adjusted the cap atop his head, a battered Navy SEAL cap, the embroidered letters barely legible now. He straightened his posture, ignoring the protests of aching joints. Because real pride never aged. Marcus glanced at a small frame photograph on his nightstand. Himself and his late wife, Susan, smiling brightly on the day he returned from his final deployment. Susan, he whispered, today is for them and for us. Then he turned, taking a steady breath. Today he would walk not just in his own footsteps, but in the steps of those who could not. He dressed for Jimmy. He dressed for Mike. He dressed for Carlos, for the fallen, for the forgotten, for the ones who never got to grow old. Scene transition. Marcus approaching the front door. Before stepping out, Marcus opened a drawer and pulled out a small, tarnished silver star, one of the many medals he never displayed. He didn't wear medals for pride, but today ... He slipped it carefully into his breast pocket, close to his heart. The door creaked open, and Marcus stepped into the cool morning air. The rain kissed his face, 1,000 tiny reminders that he was still alive. No one was waiting for him outside. There were no crowds, no salutes, just a lone figure, carrying a lifetime of memories with quiet dignity. Narrator voice warm, slow, heavy with meaning. He wasn't wearing that uniform for applause. He wasn't wearing it for medals or ceremonies. He wore it for brotherhood, the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of battle, for sacrifice, the weight carried by every survivor, for patriotism, the kind that is lived quietly, humbly, day after day, long after the wars have ended. Part 2. The diner full of strangers. The rain clung to Marcus's jacket as he made his way through the quiet streets of town. His boots splashed lightly through puddles forming along the cracked sidewalks, each step measured, deliberate. This town had changed. Once it had been a place where everyone knew each other by name, where a man in uniform could walk into any store, any diner, and be greeted with a handshake, to slap on the back, a heartfelt thank you for your service. But time moved on. The old faces faded away, some to the grave, others chasing opportunities elsewhere. New faces had filled the town, young and unfamiliar, faces that didn't carry the weight of memory, faces that didn't know the stories buried under these old streets. Marcus reached the diner, a squat, weather-beaten building he had once loved. It had been a second home during the years after Susan's passing, a place where he and other veterans would gather, drink endless cups of coffee, and trade stories, some funny, some painful, all sacred. Today, though, there would be no familiar smiles waiting for him. Camera shot. Marcus pushing open the door, the bell above it giving a tired ring. The inside of the diner smelled of coffee and fried bacon, just like it always had. Booths lined the walls, cracked red vinyl seats under flickering fluorescent lights. Behind the counter, a young waitress glanced up, barely hiding her disinterest. She didn't recognize Marcus, didn't see the man, only the shabby uniform clinging to his frail frame. In the far corner, a group of teenagers huddled around a table, their heads bent over their phones. They spoke loudly, laughed easily. They were too young to carry scars, too young to understand the depth of the rain-soaked man who had just entered their world. Marcus walked in with the quiet dignity of a soldier entering unknown territory. Narrator's soft, reflective tone. He was a stranger now, in a town he once helped protect, in a place where sacrifice was once celebrated and was now forgotten. Camera angle. over-the-shoulder shot as Marcus scans the room, then moves toward a booth by the window. He moved slowly, but not because he was weak. Every step was filled with the unspoken weight of memories of friends lost, of battles fought far from the safety of these neon-lit walls. He chose a booth near the window, the same booth he and his comrades used to sit at years ago. From there, he could see the street, the rain-soaked town, and remember a time when coming home meant something more. Marcus slid into the booth and sat quietly, setting his cap on the table before him. The chatter from the teenagers grew louder, their laughter sharp in the small space. One of them, an athletic young man with a phone in hand, noticed Marcus. He nudged his friends, smirking. They whispered, they snickered, they pointed. Marcus heard it. He felt it. He could have ignored it. After all, the battles he had fought were far more brutal than the careless mockery of children. But still, a sting lanced through his chest, a different kind of wound, the kind that came not from bullets, but from forgetting, from a country slowly losing its memory of what had been sacrificed for its peace. Scene shift. A waitress approaches, notepad in hand. The young woman didn't smile. Her eyes skim over Marcus as though he were an inconvenience. "What'll it be?" she asked, her voice flat. Marcus offered a soft, respectful smile. "Just a coffee," he said, voice gravelly but kind. "And a small breakfast, if you don't mind." She scribbled something barely legible onto her pad and walked away without another word. Marcus turned his gaze back to the window. The rain painted the world in gray and silver, blurring the lines between past and present. Inside the diner, the teenagers' laughter was relentless. One boy lifted his phone, pretending to take a selfie, but clearly aiming it at Marcus. They laughed harder. A caption appeared on the phone screen, mocking Marcus's tattered uniform. They thought they were funny. They thought they were clever. They thought they were untouchable. Narrator somber, heavy-hearted. They didn't see a hero. They didn't see the man who once crawled through gunfire to drag a wounded comrade to safety. They didn't see the man who had sacrificed birthdays, anniversaries, a lifetime, so that they could sit here today, laughing without fear. Scene transition. A small child toddles toward Marcus. Through the noise and the mockery, a soft presence appeared. A little boy no older than 3 wandered over to Marcus's booth. The child looked up at him with wide, curious eyes, pure, innocent, unclouded by the cynicism of adulthood. For a moment, time stood still. Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, the kind that reached his tired eyes. The boy stared at the uniform not in scorn, but in wonder. Perhaps somewhere deep inside, a part of him understood. Before anything could be said, the boy's mother rushed over, scooping him up with a flustered apology. "I'm so sorry," she said, not meeting Marcus's eyes. Marcus just nodded, understanding more in that moment than words could say. There was hope yet. Somewhere in the innocence of the young, there was hope. Scene transition. Time passes slowly. Minutes dragged on. The waitress never returned. No coffee. No breakfast. Marcus sat quietly, the empty space on his table mirroring the empty seats where his friends once laughed and shared stories. Outside, the rain picked up, tapping a mournful rhythm against the window. Inside, the teenagers lost interest. Their laughter softened. The moment passed. But for Marcus, the hurt lingered like an old injury that never fully healed. He pulled a few crumpled bills from his pocket and placed them neatly on the table, enough to cover a meal he would never receive. He stood up slowly, his body protesting, but his spirit unwavering. He placed his cap back on his head, straightened his back, and made his way to the door. Every eye in the diner turned to watch. Some watched in confusion, some in disdain. Most simply didn't care. But Marcus didn't walk for them. He walked for Jimmy, for Mike, for Carlos, for all the brothers who could no longer walk beside him. Narrator gentle, resolute. He carried their memory. He carried their sacrifice. He carried the burden of remembrance, even when the world chose to forget. Scene: Marcus stepping out into the rain, his silhouette strong against the gray morning. The rain welcomed him like an old friend. He pulled his jacket tighter, not against the cold, but against the ache that came from knowing he had lived when so many had not. Marcus Harris stood under the diner's awning, the rain dripping from the edge of the roof. He waited for what no one knew, not even Marcus himself. Maybe a sign, maybe a moment of recognition, maybe just a moment to remember. He stood alone, a monument to honor and perseverance. The rain fell harder, and still he stood, because some things were worth standing for, even if you stood alone. Part 3. Laughter across the room. Mockery of the unknown. The soft drumming of rain outside. Inside, the diner's fluorescent lights hung quietly overhead. Marcus stood under the diner's awning, his uniform heavy with rain, but his spirit unbowed. Inside, the scene had already shifted. The group of teenagers so loud, so oblivious, had found new entertainment. Him, camera angle, inside the diner, from behind the group of teens. At first, it was just snickering small, stifled laughs. Whispers passed from mouth to ear like wildfire. Then came the phones, lifted in secret, and then not-so-secret glances. The young man who had recorded Marcus earlier was now scrolling through editing apps, adding captions, filters, ridiculous sound effects. Their laughter bubbled, louder, shameless, unkind. They mocked the way his jacket sagged. They joked about how his cap barely stayed perched on his thinning hair. They laughed at what they could not comprehend, at what they had never been asked to carry. Narrator soft, slow, cutting through the nose. Mockery's easy when you don't know the weight another man carries. Scene shift. Close-up of Marcus outside, unmoving. Marcus heard their laughter, even through the glass, even through the rain. It cut deeper than he expected, not because it hurt his pride, not because it wounded his ego, but because it echoed a deeper fear he rarely admitted, even to himself, that the world he fought to protect was slowly forgetting why it had ever been worth fighting for. Scene: back inside the diner. The young man with the phone zoomed in on Marcus's weathered face. He added a caption, "Guess he thinks he's still in the army, LOL." Another round of laughter erupted. A second teenager, a girl with bright green hair, leaned in. "Maybe he's just crazy," she said, giggling. They all laughed harder. None of them noticed the older woman sitting 3 booths away, her coffee cooling untouched before her. She had watched Marcus walk in. She had seen the way he stood, the way he carried himself, and she knew. Scene: woman's POV watching the group with growing sadness. She remembered the parades when soldiers came home, the tears, the hugs, the flags lining Main Street. She remembered how families would leave an empty chair at the dinner table for those who never returned. And she knew these kids had never seen that. They had only seen war in video games and movies, where heroes respawn after they die and sacrifice is just a storyline. They didn't understand the price that had been paid. They didn't understand that Marcus Harris wore that uniform not to relive glory, but to honor ghosts they would never meet. Scene transition. Marcus shifts slightly under the awning, a slow breath, a heavy heart, but his back remained straight. The rain pelted his shoulders. He didn't flinch. In the glass, he could see their reflections, their laughter frame like a photograph he wished he could forget. He didn't hate them. He pitied them, because ignorance was a kind of poverty too. Narrator heavy. Deliberate. They laughed because they had never had to crawl through mud for a brother who had just taken a bullet, because they had never stood at attention while taps played for a friend laid to rest, because they had never felt the hollow ache of making it home ... when others didn't. Scene. Inside the diner, a shift begins. Not everyone was laughing. The woman at the third booth wasn't. A father sitting with his two young sons noticed Marcus too. He watched his children, watching the teenagers, confusion on their innocent faces. A lesson began to form silently in his mind, a lesson about respect, about gratitude, about history. Without a word, he pulled his boys a little closer, shielding them not from danger, but from contempt. Scene. Marcus turns from the window, preparing to walk away. He knew he wasn't wanted here, but that didn't matter. He wasn't there for applause. He wasn't there to teach anyone a lesson. He was there to remember, to carry the memories of those who could not, to make sure, if only for himself, that their sacrifices would not fade into nothingness. Scene. Close-up of Marcus's face, lined, rain-soaked, and wavering. He took one last look at the diner, the kids laughing, the faces of strangers, and he forgave them, because he remembered being young once too. He remembered the arrogance of believing the world was invincible, that freedom was free. He remembered, and he forgave, because that's what warriors do. Narrator voice soft, powerful, resolute. He didn't need their thanks. He didn't need their recognition. He had already earned something far greater. The unbreakable bond of brotherhood, the silent oath of sacrifice, the deep, unshakable knowledge that freedom's price had already been paid. Scene. Thunder rumbles again. A shadow moves at the edge of the frame, unseen by those inside. The rain fell harder, but a change was coming, a reckoning, and Marcus would stand ready, because some men are built not just for war, but for endurance, for standing tall when the world forgets, for carrying the torch when others let it fall. Part 4. Memories of blood and brotherhood. Marcus stood alone under the diner's awning. The rain fell heavier now, soaking through the seams of his old uniform, tracing cold lines down his spine. Yet he did not move. He didn't need to. This wasn't the first time he'd stood alone, and it wouldn't be the last. And the steady rhythm of the rain, and the hum of the town that had forgotten him, memories surfaced raw, vivid, unstoppable. Scene. Marcus closes his eyes, cut to memory. A war-torn landscape under a burning sun. There was the roar of helicopter blades slicing through the dense air, the smell of gunpowder thick in his nostrils, the taste of fear on his tongue, but also something else, the steady, grounding presence of his brothers round him. Jimmy, Mike, Carlos, names carved into his heart deeper than any metal could reach. Narrator slow, reverent. In war, you don't fight for medals. You fight for the man beside you, for the brother who would take a bullet meant for you, for the brother you swore you'd bring home no matter the cost. Scene. Flashback. An intense firefight. Gunfire erupted like a violent storm. Chaos reigned, but Marcus remembered every detail: the heat, the grit in his mouth, the pounding of adrenaline in his veins. He remembered crawling through dirt and blood to reach Mike, who had been hit in the leg. He remembered Carlos covering him, shouting through the nose, "We don't leave him. You hear me?" And Jimmy, the loudest, bravest soul Marcus ever knew, dragging Mike to safety, only to take a round himself moments later. Scene back to Marcus standing in the rain. A muscle in Marcus's jaw tightened. He remembered kneeling beside Jimmy, feeling the life slip from him even as he pressed uselessly against the wound. Jimmy's last words weren't for himself. They were for them. "Get him home, Marcus. Promise me." And Marcus had promised, not with words, with everything he had left. Scene transition. Another memory. Nighttime exfiltration mission. Marcus saw again the night they infiltrated enemy lines to rescue hostages. It was pitch black. Every breath, every heartbeat, a potential death sentence. He remembered the silent hand signals, the squeeze on the shoulder for luck, the whispered prayers. He remembered kicking down a door to find 3 terrified civilians huddled inside, their faces lit with desperate hope. He remembered the feeling pure and filtered purpose as they pulled them to safety under enemy fire. He remembered thinking, "This is what we're fighting for. Not politics, not glory. People." Narrator voice trembling slightly with emotion. "They fought for those who couldn't fight for themselves. They bled for those who would never know their names. They died, not as pawns, but as protectors, as brothers." Scene back to Marcus. The rain masks the tears slipping down his face. He didn't brush them away. He let them fall. Because tears were not weakness. Tears were remembrance. Tears were the language of a heart still faithful to promises made in blood. Scene. A passing car splashes a puddle. The teenagers inside the diner laugh again. Marcus didn't flinch. He barely noticed, because he wasn't here. Not really. He was elsewhere, crouched behind a crumbling wall in the Middle East, whispering encouragement to a bleeding brother. He was on the deck of a ship, arms linked with men who understood what brotherhood truly meant. He was in 100 different moments that shaped him, moments that cost more than words could ever explain. Scene transition. Close up on the silver star in his jacket pocket. The metal was heavy today, heavier than usual, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Survival, loss, duty, and a sacred debt that could never truly be paid. Narrator low, steady withal. Marcus Harris didn't wear that uniform because he wanted recognition. He wore it because he remembered. Because forgetting would be a betrayal too heavy to bear. Scene. Thunder grows louder. Lightning flashes briefly, illuminating Marcus's silhouette. Somewhere inside the diner, the mood shifted slightly. Not much, but enough. The older woman, who had been watching, whispered something to her server. The father with 2 young sons spoke quietly to them, teaching without sermons, lessons carved by example. Scene. Marcus closes his eyes briefly, steadying himself. He wasn't waiting for pity. He wasn't waiting for validation. He was standing in the rain to honor every brother who couldn't. To honor Jimmy's last laugh, Mike's stubborn grin, Carlos's fierce loyalty, and every nameless soul buried under foreign skies whose stories would never be taught in schools or sung in ballads. Narrator soft, powerful. A man can survive bullets. He can survive blood and fire and loss. But what truly destroys him is being forgotten. Marcus Harris stood in the rain, to make sure that would never happen. Scene. Camera slowly pulls back, showing Marcus framed by the gray morning, a lone sentinel. The world around him rushed by, indifferent. Cars, people, laughter, but Marcus stood apart, a man out of time, a monument of flesh and bone to sacrifices that paved the very sidewalks they walked without thought. He was not angry. He was not bitter. He was simply faithful to a promise, to a brotherhood, to a flag that had wrapped too many of his friends in final, unreturnable goodbyes. Scene ends. The rumble of approaching engines in the distance. Something was coming, something that would soon remind this town what true honor looked like. But Marcus didn't know that yet. He stood in the rain, alone, and that was enough for now. Part 5. The Arrival. Navy SEALs roll in. Marcus remained under the awning, his uniform clinging to him like a second skin soaked in remembrance. Inside the diner, life had returned to a fragile normal. The teenagers had drifted back into their nosy conversations, tossing French fries at each other and scrolling endlessly on their phones. Their laughter, though, was quieter now, tinged with unease, as if some invisible shift had occurred. The father with the 2 young boys kept glancing outside. The woman at the third booth stirred her coffee, but never took a sip. The rain had become part of the background, a soft, relentless hymn. And then it happened. Scene. A low, rumbling growl rises above the rain. At first, it was just a sound, a distant, powerful roar growing louder. Heads turned, conversations faltered, phones lowered. Even the teenagers looked up, frowning in confusion. Through the sheets of rain, massive black SUVs rolled into view, their engines a deep, commanding thrum against the sleepy backdrop of the town. 3 of them, pristine, unmarked, save for the gleam of the Navy SEAL insignia on their sides. They pulled up sharply in front of the diner, tires splashing water in dramatic arcs. The diner fell into a stunned, complete silence. Narrator hushed, reverent. Honor had come to call, and it would not be ignored. Scene. The SUV doors open in perfect unison. 8 men step out, moving with precision, every motion crisp and synchronized. They wore full Navy dress uniforms impeccably tailored, gleaming metals catching the light even through the storm. Each face was etched with solemnity, a gravity born not of ceremony, but of understanding. Brotherhood recognizes its own. Scene. The leader steps forward. At the head of the formation walked Captain Brian Mitchell, a man built like stone, his presence commanding immediate respect. In his eyes burned the fire of a lifetime of service and something more, loyalty, undying and fierce. He moved toward Marcus with deliberate purpose, the other SEALs falling into formation behind him. Inside the diner, no one moved, no one spoke. Even the teenagers froze, their laughter strangled in their throats. They watched, helpless, as the weight of real honor unfolded before them. Scene. Marcus lifts his head, recognizing them instantly. Marcus straightened instinctively, spine aligning, chin up. Captain Mitchell reached him and, without hesitation, snapped a salute sharp, perfect, flawless. Marcus hesitated only a second before returning it, his hand trembling slightly, not from age, but from the flood of emotions crashing through him. The 2 men locked eyes, and that silent exchange passed 1,000 unsaid words. Gratitude, respect, brotherhood. Narrator slow, thick with emotion. This was not ceremony. This was blood memory. This was one warrior acknowledging another, and in that moment, every whisper, every laugh, every careless sneer was drowned beneath the roar of truth. Scene. Captain Mitchell turns to address the diner. He spoke, his voice clear, steady, filling every corner of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "the man you see standing here is Marcus Harris." He paused, letting the name settle into the stunned air. "Marcus Harris saved my life 28 years ago," Mitchell continued, "during an operation so dangerous none of us expected to come home." He detailed the mission, the chaos, the gunfire, the impossible odds, how Marcus had refused to abandon a single man, how he had carried wounded brothers through enemy fire, how he had taken shrapnel to the leg and kept moving. Scene. Flashbacks as Mitchell speaks. Visuals of the battle. Marcus carrying wounded. Explosions lighting the night. Mitchell's voice broke slightly as he spoke of brothers lost, of promises kept. "And if it weren't for him," Mitchell said, his voice low, reverent, "I wouldn't be standing here today." Inside the diner, the young people who had laughed now stared at Marcus with wide, shame-filled eyes. The phones were lowered. The jokes were dead. Narrator firm, weighty. The truth had come crashing down, and it was heavier than any shame they had ever known. Scene. Captain Mitchell turns back to Marcus. From inside his jacket, he pulled a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a newly issued commendation, a medal long overdue, delayed by years of bureaucracy and oversight. He held it out, his hand steady. "On behalf of the United States Navy," Mitchell said, "and the brothers you never forgot, we honor you, Marcus Harris." Marcus, hands trembling slightly, accepted the medal. There were no words needed. The rain washed over them, blurring the line between past and present, between grief and grace. Scene. The patrons slowly stand, one by one. It started with the older woman, pushing herself up from her booth, eyes brimming with tears. Then the father, standing tall, his boys clinging to his sides. One by one, the diner rose to their feet. No applause, no cheers, just silent, solemn respect, the kind that mattered more than any ceremony, the kind born from understanding, finally, painfully earned. Narrator low, powerful. "Honor, real honor, is quiet. It stands in the rain, salutes its fallen, and never demands to be seen." Scene. A teenager, the same boy who had mocked Marcus, steps forward, his face, his pale eyes filled with regret. He looks at Marcus, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know." Marcus meets his gaze, his own eyes steady and kind. "You do now," Marcus says simply. No anger, no judgment, only forgiveness. Because Marcus understood. Understanding comes at a price, and he had already paid it. Scene. Captain Mitchell and the SEALs salute Marcus one final time. With military precision, they turned and filed back into the SUVS. Doors slammed, engines roared, and just as suddenly as they had arrived, they were gone, leaving behind only the echo of something larger than life, leaving behind the memory of what it meant to stand for something. Scene. Marcus watches them go, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He felt no sadness, only peace, a brotherhood reaffirmed, a promise kept, and the knowledge that even if the world forgot, he wouldn't, not today, not ever. Part 6. Transformation of a town. Inside the diner, no one moved for a long moment after the black SUVs disappeared into the mist. It was as if time itself had paused, holding its breath. The patrons, young and old, stood in stunned silence, hearts heavy, minds racing to catch up with what they had just witnessed. The rain no longer felt oppressive. It felt cleansing, a baptism of memory, a call to something deeper, something long forgotten. Scene. Marcus stands alone, his uniform heavy but his soul lighter than it had been in years. He didn't need words. He didn't need applause. He had never needed them. All he needed was what now shimmered quietly in the air around him. Recognition, respect, remembrance. Narrator gentle, hopeful. A town that had forgotten was beginning to remember, and remembering changes everything. Scene. Inside the diner. Small but powerful movements. The older woman wiped tears from her cheeks with a trembling hand. The father knelt down, speaking in hushed tones to his sons. "You always thank a veteran," he whispered. "Always." The boys nodded solemnly, absorbing the lesson not from words but from the raw truth they had witnessed. Across the diner, the teenagers who had laughed and mocked sat in shame silence. Their phones lay forgotten on the table. One by one they rose, awkward, unsure, but driven by something new burning in their chests. They approached Marcus slowly. The lead boy, the one who had filmed him, stood trembling. I deleted the video, sir," he said. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Marcus looked at him, his eyes kind but unwavering. "You know now," Marcus said softly, "and that's what matters." Scene. A ripple effect. Word spread fast, faster than gossip ever could. Within hours, stories about what had happened at the diner flooded social media. But this time there were no mocking captions, no cruel hashtags, only gratitude, only awe. Photos of Marcus standing tall in the rain, of the Navy SEALs saluting him, went viral, not for sensationalism, but for inspiration. People began to ask questions. Who was Marcus Harris? What had he done? How had we forgotten him? Narrator voice lifting with hope. Sometimes it only takes a moment of truth to awaken the better angels of a town's nature. Scene. Days later, the diner owner acts. Tom Reynolds, the diner owner, a man who had once prided himself on quick service and cheap coffee, realized he could no longer operate the same way. He met with Marcus, humbly, respectfully. "I want to do something," Tom said, "something that lasts." Marcus, ever humble, shook his head. "No need," he said. But Tom insisted, and so the back corner of the diner, the booth Marcus had always favored, was transformed. Scene. The Valor Corner. A new plaque was mounted above the booth, gleaming brass letters catching the light. "The Valor Corner, dedicated to those who serve and sacrifice, lest we forget." An American flag was folded and framed next to it. Photos of local veterans, past and present, lined the wall. Each meal served in that booth would be offered at no charge to any veteran who sat there. It became a place of honor, a living reminder that sacrifice must never be forgotten. Scene. The teenagers return. Weeks later, the same group of teenagers returned to the diner, but something was different now. They didn't laugh as they entered. They removed their hats respectfully at the door. They sat near the Valor Corner, occasionally glancing at the booth with quiet reverence. One of them, a young man named Tyler, had even joined the local OTC program, inspired by the story of Marcus Harris. Another, Jenna, had started volunteering at the local Veterans Center, helping aging soldiers with their groceries and home repairs. The town was changing, slowly, steadily, meaningfully. Narrator's soft, uplifting, a moment of laughter had become a lifetime of lessons. Scene. Marcus remains humble. He didn't seek attention. He didn't revel in his newfound fame. Every morning, rain or shine, he returned to the diner, quietly taking his place at the Valor Corner. Sometimes people joined him, fellow veterans, curious townsfolk, young people hungry for stories and wisdom. Sometimes he sat alone, staring out the window at the town he had fought for, knowing now finally that it remembered him, and more importantly, that it remembered them. Scene: a small child approaches Marcus again. One bright morning, a small boy, the same one from the day of the mockery, ran up to Marcus, holding a crayon drawing. It was a simple picture, a soldier in a uniform, standing tall under a bright sun. At the bottom, in clumsy, childish handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for fighting for us." Marcus's throat tightened. He accepted the picture with hands that had once carried brothers off the battlefield, hands that now shook not from fear, but from the overwhelming power of hope. Narrator soft, steady. Legacy isn't built with parades. It's built with remembrance, with kindness, with a single hand reaching out in gratitude. Scene: closing image. Marcus Harris, retired Navy SEAL, quiet hero, unwavering brother, sat at the Valor Corner, the crayon drawing framed beside him, a slight, contented smile on his face. The rain had stopped. The sun broke through the clouds, and the town was better for having remembered. Part 7. A legacy carved in rain and memory. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but the memory of that rainy morning never left the town. Something fundamental had shifted, something that couldn't be measured in headlines or social media posts. It was deeper, quieter, lasting. Scene: Marcus returns to the diner every year, every anniversary of that fateful mission, the one where he had dragged wounded brothers through smoke and fire, the one where promises had been made and kept in blood. Marcus donned his worn Navy SEAL uniform again. He straightened the creases best he could, polished his boots with care despite the cracks, and he walked, steady and proud, through the town that once laughed and now saluted. Narrator soft, respectful, not for glory, not for applause, but for remembrance, for the brothers who couldn't walk beside him. Scene: new faces in town greet him. Children waved little American flags. Storefronts displayed handwritten signs. "Thank you, veterans. Freedom isn't free." At the diner, the Valor Corner remained sacred. Fresh flowers appeared there, regularly left by strangers, by school children, by people who had never met Marcus, but understood what he stood for. Scene: Marcus mentors the next generation. Marcus didn't see himself as a teacher, but when young men and women from the town asked him about service, about sacrifice, about honor, he answered, not with speeches, not with grandeur, but with stories, with quiet truths forged in the fires of experience. He told them about Jimmy's stubborn grin, Mike's bad jokes, Carlos's dreams of a family farm. He told them that brotherhood wasn't about blood. It was about choice. It was about standing when you're afraid, about carrying those beside you when they fall, about promising and keeping that promise no matter what. Narrator gentle, inspiring. A flag fades, a medal tarnish, but legacy is carved deep into the hearts of those who remember. Scene: one special year, a surprise for Marcus. On the anniversary of his mission, the town organized a small ceremony without telling him. No television crews, no politicians, just neighbors, families, veterans young and old. They gathered at the diner, filling it beyond capacity. They presented Marcus with a shadow box. Inside is medals, photos from his service, and a simple plaque. Marcus Harris, brother, protector, patriot, you taught us to remember. Marcus stood there, overwhelmed. He had faced down gunfire. He had carried dying men in his arms. He had survived horrors most could never imagine, but nothing had prepared him for the simple, crushing power of gratitude. Tears slit down his weathered cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. He let them fall like rain, like memory, like absolution. Scene. Final image. Marcus sitting at the Valor corner. The rain returned that afternoon, not a storm, but a gentle mist washing the town clean. Marcus sat at his booth, crayon drawings still framed beside him, medals neatly displayed. He watched the rain. He remembered. He smiled, because he knew, finally, absolutely, that he had kept his promise, not just to Jimmy or Mike or Carlos, but to every soul who had ever fought and fallen. Narrator slow, full of warmth and closure. In the end, Marcus Harris didn't carve his name into stone. He carved it into hearts, into memories, into a town that now stood taller, remembered deeper, loved harder, because one man refused to let them forget. Scene fades to black. Soft music rises, a single trumpet playing taps. On-screen text appears. Asterisk, asterisk, to all who serve, to all who sacrifice. We remember, we honor, we will never forget. Asterisk, asterisk.